The July sky above Millfield Flats lay heavy and still. A bright blue expanse that felt eerily static, as though all the warmth of the summer afternoon conspired to hold its breath. Shelby Morgan, living in a single-story farmhouse on the outskirts of the small town, sensed an undercurrent of tension in the air. From her front porch, she could see the tall stalks of corn in the distance, barely shifting in a feeble breeze. She stood with a glass of iced tea in one hand, eyes narrowed at the sky. Something felt off, too quiet, too hot, too oppressive. At her feet sat Legend, a sturdy Pitbull with a brindle coat and warm amber eyes. Despite the dog's muscular build and blocky head, his demeanor radiated calm loyalty. Shelby had found Legend at a local shelter 2 years prior, naming him for the promise she saw in his gentle spirit. He was her anchor on lonely days, a comforting presence after she inherited the farm from her grandfather. Despite lingering prejudices in town about pit bulls, Legend defied them all with his affectionate greetings and watchful stance. That afternoon, Shelby noticed Legend's posture shift. The pit bull rose from his typical sprawl, ears alert, nose twitching as though he sensed something on the breeze she couldn't. He let out a low, uneasy whine, pacing near Shelby's feet. She frowned, setting her iced tea on the porch railing. "You all right, boy?" she asked, reaching down to scratch his ear. Legend's tail flicked once, but his gaze remained on the horizon, as if waiting for something. To Shelby's east, the sky held a faint haze, tinted grayish-blue. Farmers in the area had talked about possible storms rolling in over the next few days, the kind that sometimes brewed into dangerous systems. She recalled how the local weather station had mentioned a chance of severe thunderstorms later in the week. But that forecast didn't explain the tension in Legend's posture or the mild headache building behind her own temples. A shifting barometric pressure often signaled trouble in these parts: tornadoes, flash floods, or powerful thunderstorms that could uproot trees in minutes. Deciding not to dwell too much on it, Shelby patted her leg for Legend to follow. "Come on, let's do our rounds." Each afternoon, she made a circuit of the property, checking fences, the small stable that housed 2 old horses, and the nearby stream that fed her farmland. Legend usually trotted beside her, tail wagging in lazy arcs. Today, though, he seemed restless, pacing ahead, then circling back, whining under his breath. Shelby tried to brush off her unease. Maybe Legend was just picking up a stray animal's scent. They ventured along a dirt path winding past an ancient oak that sheltered a small barn. The air felt thick, and Shelby's shirt clung to her back with sweat. As she passed the horses' paddock, she noticed they too seemed uneasy, nickering in quiet protest. The stable cat skittered across the yard, tail puffed, vanishing into the barn's shadows. Legend let out a soft bark, muzzle lifting to the stagnant air. Shelby swore she felt a subtle change in the breeze, a sudden gust that died as quickly as it came. A fleeting sign that the weather was shifting more quickly than the forecast predicted. She continued to the far fence, verifying the barbed wire was still intact. Nearby, a short distance from the property line, lay a wide, shallow stream that often dried up in August, but now she saw its flow was surprisingly swift for mid-July. Frowning, she crouched by the bank, seeing how the water ran murky with silt. "That's odd," she murmured. "We haven't had a storm in a few days." Yet the water level stood a few inches higher than normal. Legend sniffed at the water's edge, pulling back with a short growl. Shelby, a chill creeping through her, wondered if upstream rainfall had been heavier, or if something else was pushing extra water down. The rest of the property check yielded nothing too alarming. Fences were solid, the barn door secure, the vegetable garden thriving in the hot sun. But Legend's pace never relaxed. By the time they headed back to the farmhouse, the sky had shifted to an unsettling hue of pale yellow near the horizon. Typical of an approaching storm system, Shelby felt her chest tighten with an instinctive worry. She'd grown up in this region. She knew how monstrous storms could brew out of a seemingly mundane forecast. That evening, she flipped on the local news channel. The forecaster, a wiry man in a crisp shirt, stood before a radar map swirling with green and red patches. "We have a severe thunderstorm watch in effect for the southwestern counties," he reported. "Expect high winds, potential hail, and be alert to the chance of isolated tornadoes. Keep your emergency plans ready." Legend lay at Shelby's feet, ears rotating at the forecaster's mention of tornadoes. As if he understood. Sighing, Shelby patted Legend's side. "Looks like you were right to be jumpy," she said. "Let's hope it's just a big storm that passes by." She double-checked her phone's weather alerts, reading the possibility of localized flash flooding too. Her farmland was on slightly higher ground, so flooding rarely reached her house. But it could easily inundate the lower fields, and that stream might become a raging torrent if rains were intense. Before bed, she secured the windows and doors, making sure flashlights and an emergency radio were on the kitchen table. She even placed fresh batteries in her old portable weather radio, a relic from her grandfather's tornado-wary years. Legend followed her every move, gaze tracking her intently, posture tense. "We'll be okay," she murmured, though a prickle of unease lingered. The dog whined softly as she clicked off the living room lamp, leaving them in darkness. In her bedroom, she opened the window a crack, letting in a faint breeze that carried the distant rumble of thunder. As she lay down, Shelby couldn't shake the sense of foreboding, even though the radar predicted the worst storms for the next day or so. Her instincts told her that the approaching system might be fiercer than usual. She drifted into a fitful sleep. Legend curled at the foot of the bed, occasionally lifting his head to huff at the night air. By dawn, the humidity pressed down like a damp blanket. Shelby awoke to find Legend pacing by the door, eyes bright with urgency. Outside, the sky was an odd gray-green, illuminated by scattered flashes of distant lightning. The forecast was no longer ambiguous. Storms were heading straight for Millfield Flats. She hurried to the porch, scanning the horizon, noticing thick clouds rolling in from the west, layered in ominous shades of charcoal and bruised purple. The wind had kicked up, rattling the shutters. She fumbled for her phone to check the severe weather alerts. Indeed, multiple warnings had popped up overnight, a tornado watch now in effect, with the possibility of heavy rainfall. At that moment, she heard the distant blare of a siren, faint, but chilling all the same. The county occasionally tested tornado sirens, but this was no scheduled test. Legend barked, whining as he pawed at Shelby's leg. She felt her heartbeat spike. "We should get ready," she breathed. She dashed inside, rummaging in her closet for the emergency kit her grandfather had insisted she maintain. First aid items, bottled water, a stash of canned food, battery-powered lanterns, and a portable charger for her phone. The night prior, she'd already placed flashlights and the weather radio on the table, but now she double-checked everything. Legend hovered at her ankles, restless. Shelby's house did have a small storm cellar, a cramped, partially underground space accessible from a hatch off the back porch. Typically, it was musty and seldom used, but in the event of a tornado, it was the safest bet. She threw supplies into a duffel bag, a blanket for Legend, some dog food, water bottles, and the first aid kit. She realized her hands were shaking. The siren wailed again, still distant. The local radio blared updates. Tornado watch upgraded to a warning in certain areas. If you're in or around Millfield Flats, take shelter immediately. Her breath caught in her throat. This was more than just a possible storm. Legend let out a sharp bark, almost as if urging her to hurry. Outside the window, the wind whipped the branches of the ancient oak, and she glimpsed a strange swirl of dust near the distant cornfields. The sense of dread was overpowering. She slung the duffel bag over her shoulder, whistling for Legend to follow. "Come on, boy, time to head down," she said, voice taut with adrenaline. They stepped onto the back porch. Gusts buffeted them, sending leaves scuttling. The sky above roiled in chaotic patterns. Dark clouds stacked in layers, occasionally illuminated by flashes of lightning. The farmland that had felt so tranquil only the day before was now a stage for nature's fury. Legend pressed against Shelby's leg, whining. The wind stung Shelby's eyes, but she forced herself forward, unfastening the latch to the storm cellar hatch. She yanked it open, dust and the smell of damp earth wafted out. The narrow steps descended into darkness. She turned, scanning the yard one last time. The horses, could she leave them in the stable? She had no time to evacuate them properly. She prayed the stable would hold or they'd sense to find safer ground behind the sturdy building. "I'm sorry," she whispered, guilt spearing her heart. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by a thunderous boom. The air pulsed with static. Legend barked again, jolting Shelby into motion. She climbed down into the cellar, leading the Pitbull by her side. The space was cramped but would keep them safe if a tornado passed. She flicked on a lantern, set the duffel on a small ledge, and braced the hatch door shut behind them. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and concrete. Legend panted, eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. Shelby tried to reassure him, kneeling to stroke his fur. "We'll be okay," she murmured, though fear coiled in her gut. The siren sounded louder now, a bone-chilling wail that underscored the imminent danger. For a while, the cellar was a stage for anxious waiting. Shelby checked her phone signal, flicking through local news updates. Reports poured in of rotating cloud formations spotted west of Millfield Flats. A swirling wedge of a storm was potentially on track. Tornado chasers in the region posted videos that Shelby could only watch for a moment before her stomach clenched. She turned off the screen, not wanting to feed her panic. Instead, she flicked on the battery-powered weather radio, hearing the robotic voice of the emergency broadcast. "Tornado warning for southwestern Miller County. Move to an interior room or underground shelter now. Life-threatening situation." She ran a hand through Legend's fur, mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Grandpa's farmhouse had stood for decades, sturdy and well-built, but tornadoes didn't discriminate. She pictured twisted rubble and flattened barns from news reports of years past. Legend's presence, warm against her side, was the only comfort, even if the house was damaged or farmland wrecked. At least they'd be safe down here, provided the cellar withstood the worst. Time dragged. Outside, thunder boomed, wind howled in sudden gusts, and hail occasionally pounded the hatch door with a rattling fury. The radio sputtered a litany of warnings, telling people to get low, stay away from windows. Legend whined at each crash, eyes flicking upward, ears swiveling. Shelby pressed her forehead to his, whispering nonsense to keep them both calm. She prayed for the storm to pass quickly, for the horses to find some measure of shelter, for the stable to hold, for the barn not to collapse. Then the world above them roared. The wind's pitch climbed from a dull howl to a freight train roar, an unearthly bellow that made the walls of the cellar tremble. Dust rained down from the old wooden beams overhead. Shelby gasped, hugging Legend tight as he let out a bark. The air pressure shifted, her ears popping painfully. She realized, with horrified clarity, that a tornado must be passing directly overhead or very close by. The sound was unlike any normal storm. The minutes that followed felt eternal, huddled in near darkness. Shelby feeling each vibration shake the ground. Debris, or perhaps large hail, struck the hatch with alarming force. She half expected it to rip away. Her heart hammered so violently she thought she might faint. Legend stayed pressed to her, trembling slightly, but not panicking. His presence anchored her to the moment, a lifeline in the chaos. Gradually, the roar diminished into a low rumble. Wind still howled, but the immediate terror subsided. Shelby remained curled there, breath heaving, tears stinging her eyes. The weather radio was garbled, crackling with static. She carefully turned the volume up, hearing fragmented words. Damage, widespread, southwestern, rescue. The transmission cut in and out. She realized the storm might still be raging, but that initial funnel cloud, if it truly touched down, could have caused destruction. She let out a shuddering breath. "We wait a bit more," she told Legend, though her voice wobbled. Long minutes crept by before the hail lessened and thunder rolled away, replaced by a quieter patter of heavy rain. Shelby fought the urge to rush out immediately. What if another cell followed? Another funnel? She waited, monitoring the radio. It took nearly half an hour before the local station announced the tornadic cell had moved east. Although severe thunderstorm conditions persisted, only then did Shelby decide it was safe enough to poke her head outside. Cautiously, she lifted the hatch. Rain pelted her face. The wind still whipped, but not as violently. A surreal gloom enveloped the farmyard. She and Legend emerged, stepping onto the soggy ground. Water pooled everywhere, forming large puddles that glinted in the storm's gray light. Something felt change, twisted. The near silence after the roar was deafening, save for the hiss of rainfall and distant thunder. Her eyes darted to the farmhouse, still standing, though battered. Shingles lay scattered on the grass. and a window near the living room had blown out. Her throat constricted. She spied the stable in the distance. Roof partially torn and leaning at an odd angle. Large sections of wood stripped away. She called the horses names, voice trembling, and to her relief, heard a faint whinny. They were alive. At least, she'd check on them soon. The barn, or what was left of it, that ancient oak behind the barn had snapped. Massive limbs strewn across the yard, part of the trunk ripping a chunk out of the barn's roof. Boards lay everywhere, and Shelby's stomach lurched to see just how close it had come to flattening the structure entirely. Legend prowled beside her, sniffing debris, letting out a low whine as if in commiseration with the wreckage. The farmland beyond, once neat rows of corn, was flattened in spots, twisted in others, as though a giant hand had pressed down. She noticed a scattering of metal, perhaps the old windmill or pieces of someone else's property carried by the funnel. Speechless, Shelby patted Legend, who looked up at her, ears drooping. At least we're safe, she murmured. Her mind reeled at the cleanup that would follow. But it could have been worse, far worse. She swallowed, recalling how the dog had sensed something off from the start, urging her to shelter earlier than she might have otherwise. If she had delayed, who knew if they'd have made it to the cellar in time? She quickly tended to the horses, stepping gingerly over fallen limbs. One horse had a small gash on its flank from flying debris. But both seemed mostly unharmed, trembling in a corner of their damaged stable. She consoled them with pats, promising to bring first aid supplies. Legend stayed near, occasionally barking at shifting debris in the wind. Returning to the farmhouse, Shelby found the living room floor strewn with glass shards from the broken window. Water pooling on the rug. A framed photo had fallen off the mantel. Its glass cracked. She sighed, moving to gather towels and a broom. She'd have to patch the window soon, or at least cover it with plastic. Legend stepped around the debris, muzzle low, as though investigating the storm's aftermath. Before she began cleaning, Shelby flicked on the battery-powered radio, hoping for updates on the tornado's path. The power, unsurprisingly, was out. The station crackled with urgent voices. Multiple structures damaged near Millfield Flats. Widespread power outages, potential flash flooding in low-lying areas. Her pulse spiked again. If the stream near her property was flooded, it could worsen the damage. She needed to check it again, but first ensure the house was secure. Legend let out a bark at the open window. Water trickling in from the rain. Shelby forced herself into action, rummaging for a spare tarp in the closet. She quickly draped it over the broken window, nailing its edges to the frame. The wind still howled, but not as fiercely. As she pounded the last nail, she paused, hearing what sounded like distant sirens, possibly emergency responders racing down the main highway. She said a silent prayer for her neighbors. If her property looked like this, others might be worse off. Needing to assess the rising waters, Shelby grabbed a flashlight and some rope, just in case. She whistled for Legend, who padded over obediently. Outside, she traversed the soggy yard, weaving around debris fields, eyes scanning for more hazards. The sky remained a miserable gray, rain continuing to fall in sheets. The orchard next to the barn had lost several branches, apples scattered across the muddied ground. She tried not to dwell on the heartbreak of it, focusing instead on survival. Approaching the stream, she felt her stomach clench. The once modest waterflow now raged, the banks overflowing, turning the surrounding grassland into a swirl of muddy currents. She stood at a safe distance, stunned by the torrent. If this kept rising, it might flow into lower parts of her property. She recalled how Grandpa always said the stream rarely flooded the farmhouse, only in truly catastrophic storms. But seeing the water's fierce power, Shelby realized they might be facing such a scenario. Legend growled at the rushing water, ears pinned back. Shelby understood the concern. She'd never seen it this high, not in years of living there. She decided to retreat, not wanting to risk a misstep near the slick bank. Returning to the house, she tried her phone, hoping to reach a friend in town or check on the emergency alerts. The signal was spotty, calls dropping immediately. She grit her teeth, exasperated. The county's cell tower might have been damaged. She rummaged in her closet for a handheld radio that occasionally picked up local emergency broadcasts better than her phone. Tuning it, she caught fragments of an operator's voice, Significant damage, southwestern edge, intersection near farmland, roads blocked. The transmission fizzled. She cursed softly, wishing she had clearer intel on what was happening in the rest of Millfield Flats. Legend nudged her arm, whining. Shelby's mind spun. If roads were blocked, she couldn't easily drive out for supplies, or to find help if the water rose further. She might be stranded for a bit. She looked around the battered house, battered farm, feeling a wave of exhaustion, but also a surge of determination. She had her emergency kit, some supplies. She needed to keep a level head and see what the next few hours brought. The storm, though it had passed in its most violent form, still lingered in the form of relentless rain. Steeling herself, Shelby spent the afternoon securing what she could, moving valuables and electronics to higher shelves in case of floodwater, checking the stable for reinforcement options, and calming the horses with gentle words and feed. Legend followed her constantly, occasionally sniffing at broken boards or letting out concerned whines. In breaks between tasks, she'd scratch his chin, murmuring appreciation. "You got us down there just in time. Boy, thank you." The day wore on, the clouds never parted, and the rain hammered ceaselessly. By early evening, the water in the stream had crept closer, turning the lower fields into a soggy marsh. Shelby prepared herself for the possibility that part of her farmland might be lost if the water surged further. She was thankful the main house sat on slightly elevated ground, but no guarantee that would hold against an extreme flood. She found she could barely eat, mind churning with scenarios of worst-case flood damage. Night fell in a gray hush. Without electricity, Shelby lit a kerosene lantern in the kitchen, placing it on the table where she had laid out her duffel and flashlight. Rain battered the roof, thunder growling occasionally in the distance. Legend curled at her feet. She tried to get some rest, but every time she closed her eyes, she pictured the swirling stream, the battered barn, the stable's torn roof. She worried about aftershocks of the storm, a second wave or more high winds. At around 10 p.m., a fresh wave of thunder cracked. The wind picked up, rattling the tarp on the broken window. Legend jolted awake, ears pricked. Shelby tried to calm him with a stroke, but she too felt the renewed tension. She leaned in to peer outside. The darkness was nearly absolute. No street lights or farm lights to cast a glow. She heard the water's rush distinctly, as if it were closer. Her heart skipped. She had to see how much the water level had risen, even if it was risky in the dark. Grabbing the flashlight and a poncho, she ventured out. Legend followed, tail rigid. She crossed the yard, stepping gingerly through mud and puddles. The orchard was a pitiful sight of debris, and the stable beyond it moaned under the wind's force. She listened for the horses' anxious nickers, relieved to hear them alive, though undoubtedly frightened. Finally, she reached the vantage point overlooking the stream. Her heart sank at the flashlight beam illuminating a broad expanse of churning water, no longer a neat channel, but a wide, muddy flood swallowing fence posts and low-lying brush. She gasped, stepping back as water lapped at the base of the small hill leading to the house. "God," she breathed, "we're inches from major flooding." The wind whipped around her, stinging her cheeks with rain. Legend barked at the watery chaos, as if trying to warn her further. Shelby weighed her options. If the water continued to rise overnight, it could threaten the house, leaving her no safe recourse but the storm cellar again. But the cellar was hardly flood-proof. It was meant for tornadoes, not rising water. She worried about being trapped if water poured in. Another thought struck. If the roads were blocked or destroyed, no one might rescue them quickly. She had to decide if it was safer to stay put or attempt leaving while it was still possible. But in the black of night, with the farmland half submerged, driving seemed fraught with risk. She could hit a washed-out road or deep water with no turning back. The prudent choice was to remain. Hope the water peaked soon. She retreated to the house, Legend at her heels. Inside, her nerves buzzed like live wires. She paced the living room, rummaging again for any water rescue gear. She found an old inflatable raft in the barn, but it was probably battered or deflated, and it was insane to consider rowing across farmland at night in a raging storm. No, she'd wait, hope the water receded, or at least stabilized. Legend panted, pacing with her. She recognized that the dog fed off her anxiety. She forced a calming tone. kneeling to hold his broad head between her palms. "We're okay, I promise," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. He gazed at her, tail wagging faintly. The wind howled, and water dripped from the tarp, forming a steady puddle on the floor. She spent a fitful night on the couch, lamp flickering, Legend curled close. The hours crawled, each crash of thunder or gust of wind jarring her awake whenever she drifted off. Eventually, the storm seemed to move, thunder growing more distant. By dawn, the rain had reduced to a steady drizzle. The first pale light revealed a somber landscape, farmland partially submerged. Debris scattered, fences broken. Shelby stepped onto the porch. Legend beside her. The water had crept up to about 40 yards from the house, turning much of the lower yard into a shallow lake. She exhaled shakily, at least it hadn't reached the foundation yet. Overhead, the clouds still hung heavy, but the most violent phase of the storm seemed past. She tried her phone again, still no signal. The battery radio crackled, offering partial updates. Major flooding in southwestern county. Some roads unpassable, emergency crews focusing on hardest hit areas. Shelby dreaded how many neighbors might need help. Maybe the main road was accessible, or maybe it was underwater. She decided not to risk driving until she was sure it was safe. She and Legend spent the morning in a daze of basic survival tasks, checking on the horses, bailing out the stable where water had pooled, rescuing tools from the near-flooded barn. The orchard stood waterlogged, half the fruit ruined. She paused, leaning on a broken fence post, trying not to cry at the destruction. Legend nuzzled her hand in silent sympathy. Then, near midday, she heard a distant roar, like an engine. She squinted down the muddy driveway leading to her property. A large pickup splashed through the watery ruts. Coming closer, Legend barked, tense but curious. Shelby recognized the vehicle as her friend Jonah's truck. Relief poured through her. She hadn't known if or when someone might check on her. She waved, chest tight with gratitude as Jonah braked near the house. Water sloshed around the tires. Jonah hopped out, wearing rubber boots and a rain jacket. "Shelby," he shouted over the wind. "You all right?" She nodded, tears escaping. "Yeah, we made it through. The house is damaged. The barn too. But we're okay." Legend bounded forward to greet Jonah, who patted the dog's head, relief evident in his eyes. "Heard on the radio that your area got hit bad. Roads are a mess, but I found a way around. Brought some supplies. Figure you're short on stuff. Also checking if you need to evacuate." Shelby's eyes flicked to the watery stretch behind her. "It's close, but so far, the water hasn't reached the house. Power's out, phone's dead, but we have enough to hold out a bit." She studied Jonah's face. "Think we should evacuate anyway? The stable's trashed. Orchard is half gone." Jonah surveyed the flood. "The main highway is partially flooded. Took me an hour to find a route around. You might be safer heading into town if water's still rising. But if it's stabilizing, might be okay to stay. Our local volunteers are busy with houses that are fully underwater. Up to you. I can try to get you and Legend out. But it's not guaranteed we won't get stuck ourselves." Shelby weighed her options. She hated to abandon the property. The horses needed care, and she worried about further damage if no one was around to mitigate it. But risking the drive might put her life, and Legend's, in danger if they hit impassable water. She recalled the stream's furious flow, how quickly roads could wash out. Glancing at Legend's vigilant stance, she decided she'd remain if conditions didn't worsen. Jonah handed her extra batteries, bottled water, and some basic groceries. "I'll do a supply run for you later if you're stuck," he offered. He stayed a while, helping remove debris from around the stable and patch some holes in the roof tarp. Legend followed them, barking occasionally at floating objects in the fields. By late afternoon, Jonah had to leave, checking other neighbors. Shelby thanked him profusely, hugging him despite the mud on his jacket. "Stay safe, you hear?" Jonah said, gripping her shoulders. "If that water climbs any further, find high ground or call if you can." She nodded, tears stirring again. "Will do." As night fell on day 2 post-storm, the water level appeared steady, maybe receding an inch or two. Shelby tried to remain cautiously optimistic. She lit more candles and lanterns, rationing fuel. She rummaged for non-perishable foods from the pantry. Legend accepted each small meal or treat with subdued gratitude, as though sensing the tension still weighed on her. They curled up again in the living room. Main lights still dead. Outside, lightning flickered occasionally, but the worst of the storm seemed done. Shelby reflected on the past day's chaos, the tornado siren wail, that monstrous roar overhead, the flood threatening to swallow her farmland. If Legend hadn't acted jumpy when the barometric pressure first dropped, she might have delayed seeking shelter in the storm cellar. The twister could have caught them unprepared. She ruffled Legend's ears, murmuring, "You saved us. You know that?" The dog pressed close, tail thumping softly. In the days ahead, she'd face extensive cleanup, shattered barn sections, orchard replanting, stable repairs, orchard replanting, orchard replanting, orchard replanting, orchard replanting, orchard. At this point, we have a repeated phrase. A glitch. Let's correct it. Correcting the repeated phrase. In the days ahead, she'd face extensive cleanup, shattered barn sections, orchard replanting, stable repairs, an overwhelming amount of labor. But at least she and Legend were alive. The storm might have claimed property, but it hadn't taken them. And for that, she was deeply grateful. She stared at the flickering candle, picturing the farmland's future. Uncertain and battered, but still standing, Legend, half dozing at her side, was her constant reminder of resilience. Come what may, the Pitbull had proven time and again that loyalty and intuition could transcend fear. She'd rely on that unwavering bond as she rebuilt, yard by yard, fence by fence, orchard row by orchard row. And if next time the wind howled too fiercely, or the barometric pressure shifted ominously, Shelby knew Legend would be the first to alert her, guiding her away from nature's fury and into whatever patch of safety they could find, hand in paw. Forging a quiet but powerful alliance in the face of life's storms. Daylight broke the next morning in a sullen haze of lingering storm clouds. Though the worst of the tempest had passed, Shelby Morgan woke to a changed world around her farmhouse. The once tidy yard was strewn with torn branches, twisted metal, and scattered debris from who knew where. The orchard's gentle rows were marred by uprooted trees, and the stable roof, which had once provided reliable shelter, now leaned precariously, partially caved in by the falling oak. Legend, Shelby's loyal Pitbull, rose from his spot on the couch as soon as she stirred. The dog stretched, his brindle coat catching the pale morning light that filtered through the tarp window. Shelby gave him a tired smile, ruffling his ears. "Morning, boy," she murmured, voice husky from lack of proper sleep. Outside, she could hear the soft shudder of wind and the faint drip of leftover rain from eaves and broken gutters. The calm after a storm always felt eerie, too quiet, too full of wreckage to truly be at peace. Stepping onto the porch, Shelby surveyed the property in the gray dawn. Water still soaked the lower fields, though she noted with relief that it hadn't risen closer to the house overnight. A quick call of the horses' names reached them in the stable's battered structure. They answered with anxious nickers. Legend trotted forward, letting out a quick bark as if to confirm the horses were still safe. Shelby decided to start the day by ensuring the animals were secure. She pulled on her mud-caked boots and trudged through soggy patches of lawn. The orchard paths, once neatly graveled, had turned into muddy ruts. She approached the stable with a heavy heart. Its roof had partially collapsed on the far side, where a heavy branch from the oak tree skewered the rafters. She glimpsed movement inside. Both horses stood in the corner, eyes wide, flanks streaked with dirt. "All right, easy," she crooned. Stepping inside, she found the stable passable enough to approach them. The air smelled of damp straw and broken wood. Legend followed, carefully navigating the debris. Shelby gently patted the horses, checking them for fresh injuries. Aside from one deeper cut on the older mare's shoulder, they seemed only frightened and scuffed. "We'll get that cleaned up," she promised, rummaging for the stable's first aid box. She dabbed antiseptic on the wound, apologizing softly when the mare twitched. Legend watched from a respectful distance, occasionally letting out a low whine as though empathizing with the horse's distress. Once the horses were calm, she realized the stable's structural integrity was questionable. If another gust of wind or storm cell struck, the partial roof could collapse further. She'd have to decide whether to move the horses to the far side of the pasture, where they might at least avoid falling beams. But with the orchard so messy and water in the fields, leading them out seemed challenging. She'd have to figure it out carefully. For the moment, she placed fresh hay in a safer corner, giving them space to rest. "It'll be okay," she told them, though she wasn't entirely certain. Returning to the house, she rummaged for an old battery-powered radio, hoping to catch updates on local road closures. She flicked it on, hearing the static fade into a crackling broadcast. The news anchor's voice was subdued. Reports of tornado touchdowns across multiple areas. Millfield Flats among the hardest hit. Widespread power outages continue. The mayor urges residents to remain cautious, do not drive through flooded roads. Emergency crews are prioritizing heavily damaged zones. Please check on neighbors. Stay safe. Shelby sighed, fiddling with the volume. She wondered about her neighbors up and down the rural roads. So many people in this region lived on farmland or small homesteads. She prayed none had faced worse devastation. She thought of Jonah's visit the previous day. Maybe he'd spread word she was safe. Or maybe he'd gone to help others. Legend bumped her leg with his nose, as if urging her not to dwell in despair. She gently scratched his chin. "You're right, boy, let's do what we can." Her immediate tasks were monumental. She needed to clear a path around the house, patch holes in the roof, salvage whatever orchard trees she could, and check if the barn was stable enough to store equipment. She grabbed a pair of work gloves, an old wheelbarrow, and led Legend outside. The first few hours were spent dragging broken branches into piles, uncovering half-buried fence posts, and sorting through random debris, bits of siding, shredded tarps, and once, a battered children's toy that definitely didn't belong to her. The storm must have carried it from miles away. While piling rubble near the barn, she paused, noticing Legend sniff a chunk of twisted metal. On closer inspection, it looked like part of a truck's bumper. The paint scoured away. A pang of concern shot through her. Someone else's vehicle might have been destroyed in the tornado's path. She placed it aside, resolving to mention it to whomever might be coordinating cleanup efforts. By midday, Shelby's muscles ached, sweat dripping despite the cooler post-storm temperature. She decided to take a break, heading back inside for water and a bite to eat. Legend trailed her, panting. She poured him fresh water in his bowl, refilling her own supply from the bottled water Jonah had brought. Then she rummaged the pantry for something easy, canned peaches and crackers. A far cry from a proper meal. But she lacked energy for cooking. With the power still out and no immediate sign of restoration, she had to ration the perishable foods in her fridge, which was quickly losing its chill. As she ate, Legend lay at her feet, occasionally peeking up as though reading her mood. She found herself recalling how, just days ago, life felt routine, morning chores, quiet evenings on the porch, Legend dozing contentedly. Now, each moment was a scramble to recover. Her stable partly ruined, orchard decimated, entire farmland drowning in stormwater. She gently placed a hand on Legend's back. "I'm so glad you warned me early," she whispered. "We might not have made it to the cellar otherwise." The dog offered a small wag, as if modestly declining credit. In the afternoon, Shelby decided to attempt a short drive into town, just to see if the main road was passable and to check on neighbors or supplies. The water in the yard had receded enough that her truck might navigate it, though the roads beyond were uncertain. She loaded Legend into the passenger seat, duffel bag of emergency gear behind them, and steeled herself for the possibility that the route might be blocked. Pulling onto the gravel lane was sobering, ruts and large puddles made for slow going. Fallen branches forced her to maneuver around them, occasionally scraping the truck's sides. Legend sat alert, head out the open window, sniffing the damp air. As she approached the main county road, Shelby found it partially washed out in sections, with a shallow but forceful current of water streaming across. She carefully eased the truck through, heart pounding until they reached the other side. Another half-mile, she encountered a large fallen pine that covered half the road, but there was just enough space to squeeze by. Around the next bend, she spotted a group of people clearing debris from the roadway. She recognized a few faces, neighbors from about a mile away. Jonah was there, wearing a reflective vest. Waving her down, she parked on the shoulder, letting Legend hop out behind her. Jonah ran up, relief flooding his features. "You made it through the night." "Good." He gestured at the scattered logs and branches across the road. "We're trying to open a path so emergency vehicles can pass." "Got quite a mess." Shelby nodded, Feeling a surge of gratitude to see others banding together, she volunteered to help. Over the next hour, they used chainsaws and ropes to move large debris, forming a rough corridor that vehicles could navigate. Legend occasionally barked at the loud saws, staying close to Shelby whenever a truck rattled by. She noticed the camaraderie among neighbors, all sweat-stained and somber, many with stories of near misses or collapsed sheds. One older farmer recounted how he barely escaped his own barn before the tornado tore it apart. Another spoke of a relative's house that was flattened. The mood was grim, but the sense of community was strong. When the road was somewhat cleared, Shelby spoke with Jonah about the orchard's ruin, the stable damage. "I don't know if I can manage it all alone," she admitted, voice tight. Jonah nodded sympathetically. "Plenty of folks need help. We'll form a volunteer chain once the roads are open. Meanwhile, might be wise to get those horses out if the stable can't hold. My place has an extra paddock if you can get them there." She mulled it over. The drive to Jonah's land was a bit longer, but if the roads were mostly cleared, it might be safer for the horses than the half-collapsed stable. She decided to try it, maybe the next day, once she rigged a temporary trailer solution. For now, she'd continue clearing her property and see if the stable was salvageable enough to last a few more nights. Before heading into town, Shelby parted ways with Jonah and the neighbors. Offering heartfelt thanks, she drove carefully, scanning for further washouts. The closer she got to Millfield Flats proper, the more signs of chaos appeared: downed power lines, toppled trees, a few battered cars on the roadside. Legend rested his chin on the window, eyes wide. Shelby's chest felt tight with worry for what she'd find in town. Upon arriving, she saw that while some buildings were intact, others bore visible scars from the storm. A gas station had its canopy ripped off, debris scattered across the lot. Some storefront windows were boarded, but there was also a presence of emergency workers. A makeshift aid station set up near the old church. Shelby parked, letting Legend out. A volunteer coordinator greeted her, asking if she was seeking help or offering it. She explained she was mostly checking for supplies, tarps, roofing materials, maybe feed for her horses. Inside the church's hall, a small distribution center was forming. People donated water, non-perishables, even blankets. Shelby grabbed a few essential items, quietly thankful. Legend trailed her, occasionally sniffing at the boxes. Some children patted the dog, exclaiming softly about how sweet he was. The scene was both heartrending and uplifting. Neighbors, battered by a storm, uniting to share resources. She overheard a group discussing the tornado's path. "They say it touched down twice, skipping across farmland. Lucky it wasn't a mile wide or we'd have lost half the county." Another chimed in, "Saw one funnel pass right behind the next ridge. Could have easily flattened more houses." Shelby shivered, recalling the storm cellar's trembling walls. Legend pressed close to her leg, as though sensing her spike of tension. After gathering enough to tide her over, Shelby approached a local deputy for any official updates on the roads. He recommended caution. Many back routes remained flooded or blocked by fallen trees. "Stay put if you can," he advised. "Crews are out, but it'll take time." Shelby nodded, acknowledging that her farmland was safer for the horses if she couldn't guarantee a clear path for a trailer. The church's nurse volunteer took note of Legend, praising the dog's calm amidst the commotion. Shelby exchanged a smile. "He's been my lifesaver," she said simply. The nurse mentioned how animals sometimes sense barometric shifts in the atmosphere, how that might have given them a vital head start. Shelby nodded, recalling Legend's anxious pacing days before. "No doubt in my mind," she replied. "He's the reason we got into the cellar so soon." When she finally drove back to the farmhouse, she felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that help existed, that the county was mobilizing, that she could survive a bit longer. Sorrow for the losses she saw. Neighbors who'd lost homes, farmland, or livestock. Legend lay in the passenger seat, yawning as the truck bumped along. Shelby offered him a gentle pat, grateful for his presence. "We'll make it through," she whispered. The next few days blurred into a pattern of cleanup and survival. Shelby rose at dawn, fed the horses, and tried to secure any dangerously leaning beams in the stable. She hammered tarps over the orchard's battered fencing, rummaged for salvageable fruit. Legend remained a steadfast companion. alerting her whenever a stray piece of wood teetered overhead or if an animal approached. One morning, they discovered a neighbor's lost goat wandering near the orchard. Legend barked, then led Shelby to the frightened creature, enabling her to return it safely. At night, she collapsed into fitful sleep, lulled by the hum of cicadas and the diminishing squish of receding floodwaters. The orchard was a heartbreak, scores of trees battered or uprooted. But some sections remained intact, saplings bent but salvageable. She told Legend softly, "Grandpa would say it's nature's way. We'll replant, start again." The dog wagged, as if in agreement. As the roads improved, volunteers started arriving at her property, friends from church, acquaintances from the farmers' co-op. Jonah came with a small crew, hauling chainsaws to clear the massive oak branch from the barn roof. Another neighbor helped patch the stable's worst gaps, so the horses could rest without fear of a total collapse. Legend trotted among them, wagging at the friendly greetings, occasionally dozing in the shade while saws whined and hammers clanged. One afternoon, after hours of hard labor, the group took a break near the porch, sipping iced water. Jonah, wiping sweat from his brow, turned to Shelby. "Funny how your dog was on edge before the sirens even started." "Heard that can happen, dogs sense storms." Shelby nodded, glancing at Legend lying in a patch of sun. "He'd been uneasy all day. Gave me that early warning vibe. If I brushed him off and waited. I hate to think about it." A newcomer in the group, who had harbored prejudices about pit bulls, admitted surprise. "I always pictured them as aggressive. But your Legend's a sweetheart. And apparently, he's got a nose for tornadoes." Shelby just smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. She recounted how Legend kept whining at her, circling the yard, making her uneasy enough to prepare the cellar. The newcomer shook his head in awe. "That dog's a hero," he declared. "We should mention it to the local paper. Might give people some good news amidst all this mess." Shelby blushed, not sure if she wanted publicity. But the notion that Legend's story could inspire others to respect dogs, especially pit bulls, felt right. Maybe it would help shift lingering biases. She gave a tentative nod, focusing on the immediate tasks of rebuilding. Over the next few days, a local reporter did stop by, snapping photos of the battered barn and orchard. She wrote a short piece about how many families in Millfield Flats had faced near disaster. But a well-timed warning from a vigilant pit bull ensured Shelby and her farmland animals made it through alive. As the week wore on, the storm's memory receded, replaced by the buzz of chainsaws, the shuffle of volunteers, the clang of hammers patching roofs. The water drained from the lower fields, leaving behind mud and debris. Shelby found random items in the receding flood: license plates, a child's stuffed animal, even a small metal sign from a gas station miles away. Each item told a story of the storm's ferocity. During the evenings, Shelby and Legend strolled the property, absorbing the changes. Some orchard rows were salvageable. The stable, though battered, could be repaired with enough lumber. The barn needed a partial rebuild, but at least it hadn't collapsed entirely. The farmhouse bore scars, broken windows, missing shingles, but remained structurally sound. "We'll be all right, boy," she whispered, resting a hand on Legend's sturdy neck. He responded with a gentle huff, as though reminding her to take life step by step. A highlight came when she managed to get her phone service partially restored. Dozens of missed messages and voicemails flooded in, friends from outside the county worried. Distant relatives checking up. She called them back, praising Legend's intuition as the deciding factor. Over and over, she found herself recounting how he signaled her to take shelter before the sirens even blared. It felt surreal, repeating the story, but each retelling reminded her how close they'd come to tragedy. Weeks passed, and eventually, the orchard's battered rows took on a new shape. Shelby, with Jonah's help, replanted certain saplings, trimmed broken branches. The stable roof was replaced with donated materials. The horses roamed a safer paddock while volunteers cleared the interior of unstable beams. Legend supervised every project, tail wagging at the arrival of trucks or barking if something sounded off. People joked that he was the farm's new foreman. Shelby didn't disagree. His calm watchfulness was invaluable in a time of upheaval. By late August, the farmland was functional again. If far from perfect, the orchard would take years to fully recover. But at least half remained producing. The barn had a new partial roof. The stable sturdier than before. The house's broken window was replaced, though the siding still bore dents from hail. Legend seemed to sense the tension lifting day by day, resuming his routine of dozing on the porch or exploring the yard. Shelby sometimes caught him gazing at the horizon in the evenings, as though double-checking no more storms loomed. One quiet evening, after a long day of orchard replanting, Shelby and Legend sat on the porch steps, sharing a sense of relief. The sky above glowed in a soft orange hue, free of menacing clouds. Crickets chirped. The wind gently rattled the fresh leaves. Shelby sipped a lemonade, sighing contentedly. "We made it, boy," she said, patting Legend's flank. He rested his muzzle on her knee, eyes half closed. She thought back to the horrors of that tornado's roar, the swirling darkness overhead, and the flood that nearly swallowed her fields. The memory still made her spine tingle. But each day, the sense of gratitude overshadowed the fear. Gratitude for neighbors who came to her aid, for Jonah's supply runs, for the stable's partial survival, and, most of all, for Legend, who had never wavered in his watchfulness. In her heart, Shelby knew the farmland's scars wouldn't vanish overnight. Some orchard rows might never fully recover. Barns and outbuildings needed further repairs. Financial strain weighed on her. Insurance claims would be messy. But each time anxiety threatened to consume her, she remembered how Legend's uneasy pacing had guided her to the cellar. If he could sense the storm's threat early, if he could stand by her through the worst torrent she'd ever known, she could rely on that bond to face whatever came next. One final surprise arrived in the form of an official letter from the County Emergency Management Office, praising Shelby's readiness to seek shelter. The letter specifically mentioned how her dog's early alert helped her evacuate in time. "Your preparedness, aided by your dog's remarkable intuition, stands as an example to fellow citizens." The note read. Shelby found herself chuckling at the formal tone. Legend, recognized by the county. She folded the letter, sliding it into a drawer. Perhaps she'd frame it alongside pictures of the orchard's regrowth. The next day, Harriet, one of the orchard volunteers, stopped by with her husband, exclaiming that local radio had done a brief segment about the Pitbull who warned of the tornado. Shelby shrugged, modestly amused. Harriet insisted Shelby consider doing a small talk at the next community safety fair about how animals can signal weather changes. Shelby hesitated, not exactly wanting the spotlight. But Harriet's enthusiasm was infectious. "People could learn from your story," Harriet said. "Legend isn't just a normal pet. He's a living example of how dogs can read the environment in ways we can't." "Maybe," Shelby conceded, "if it helps more folks trust pit bulls or pay attention to their pets' instincts. I guess it's worth it." Legend, napping on the porch, raised his head at the mention of his name, yawning in sleepy content. As days turned to weeks, the farmland settled into a new routine. The harvest season approached, albeit with a reduced yield from the orchard's battered trees. Shelby arranged small events to pick and sell what fruit remained, determined to keep the orchard's name and tradition alive. Legend often lounged near the stand, greeting visitors who came for fresh apples or peaches. People who heard the storm story marveled at the dog, some patting his head, praising him as a local hero. Legend always wagged politely, unruffled by the attention. Though finances were tight, Shelby felt an undercurrent of hope. She'd survived a near-catastrophic tornado and flood. She had a community that rallied around her. Orchard Rose slowly recovering, and above all, a pitbull whose devotion reminded her each day that resilience could trump ruin. On calm nights, she and Legend would walk the orchard paths, checking new saplings, inhaling the sweet scent of regrowth. Sometimes, Legend would pause, ears perked, scanning the horizon. Shelby would murmur, "No storms tonight," a gentle prayer that soared into the quiet starlight. In time, the orchard gave what it could for that season, less than usual, but enough to keep Shelby afloat. Neighbors purchased fruit in solidarity, knowing the money went toward repairs. Jonah and Harriet's families joined each weekend for orchard chores, forging deeper friendships. The orchard, once a solo inheritance, now felt like a shared labor of love, cemented by tragedy turned communal effort. By early autumn, the farmland had regained a semblance of normalcy. Piles of debris had been hauled away. Fences were patched. The stable boasted a new roof, stronger than before. The barn remained partially under construction, but enough was done to store equipment safely. Shelby replaced broken windows in the farmhouse with sturdier glass. Life continued, the land adapting to its scars. One golden afternoon, Shelby sat on a refurbished bench near the orchard's edge. Legend at her feet. The sky stretched a flawless blue overhead. Not a storm cloud in sight. She sipped a cool drink. Gaze drifting over the orchard's rows. Apple trees, battered but still standing. Leaves turning a gentle yellow in the early fall. Cornfields in the distance, not as robust as some years but coming back to life. She felt an undercurrent of peace, recalling how drastically everything could change in a single storm. She gently patted Legend's side. "We made it," she whispered again. He gazed up, panting contentedly. "You kept us safe," she continued, letting the swirl of gratitude fill her. The dog's unwavering presence was a silent testament to survival, a reminder that nature could both threaten and heal. When dusk arrived, painting the sky with purples and oranges, Shelby and Legend wandered back to the porch. She settled into the old rocking chair, the boards creaking under her weight. Legend curled beside her boots. A gentle breeze rustled the orchard leaves, carrying no hint of violence. The sense of fragile calm after a storm lingered in the land's hush, as though the farmland itself exhaled relief at the passing of that monstrous funnel and subsequent flooding. As she rocked, Shelby reflected on the months since the tornado. She felt older, wiser, more grateful. She thought of the phrase, "You can't stop a storm, but you can learn to weather it." She'd definitely done that, and Legend's early alerts made all the difference. She closed her eyes, letting a soft hum slip from her lips, a lullaby her grandfather once sang to the orchard. Legend dozed, chest rising and falling in the quiet. Night deepened, stars emerging above. In that stillness, Shelby silently promised to keep forging ahead. Orchard or no orchard, stable or no stable, the farmland might wear scars forever, but life would go on. She'd replant, rebuild, and rely on the bond she shared with a dog who'd proven that loyalty could overcome any storm. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. Legend's ears twitched, but he didn't stir from his comfortable spot, trusting the night was safe enough. Shelby's eyelids grew heavy, her heart full. Tomorrow would bring more tasks, but for now, the calm was precious. She murmured a final thanks to fate, to neighbors, and especially to a pitbull named Legend, who sensed the barometric shift that heralded a tornado and guided her to shelter in time. Nothing was certain in life, except that storms would come and go. Farmland would wax and wane. But in that farmhouse, under starlight and the quiet orchard silhouette, a woman and her dog had weathered nature's fury and come out the other side. Scarred but unbroken, living proof that sometimes the fiercest guardians came with 4 paws and a steadfast heart.